It's a real pleasure to be back here again. It was 2016, as you heard, that I was first here, and it's just fantastic to be back with so many of you, and coming back to seeing old friends as well. My name's Jeremy Nichols. I'm going to be your moderator for this session, as now the trustee of Social Value International. I'm looking forward to coming back already next August, but Professor Shen has vanished. He was there, wasn't he? Yeah. Little does he know, that I'm coming back to work with him. And I said to him, I'll come back a bit earlier so that I can learn some Mandarin. And he said, you'll have to come back in January if you're going to learn any Mandarin. So unfortunately, we're going to still be in English back then. Ben and I need to kind of compare notes before we do these kind of things, because as usual, we find ourselves slightly overlapping. I think we're going to be talking about the question of investing with impact. And I'm sure we all know that if you're going to invest any money, it will have an impact. There is no doubt. You can't avoid having an impact. So the question we really want to know is that deep enough? Has it got enough scale? Is it really going to create change? And I think this is an urgency upon us now. I think we are on a precipice when we look around the challenges that we face as a global society. I don't think we're looking down the precipice. I think we're either looking up into the clouds or we're still looking behind our backs. We seem somehow to be not aware that we have the FAO telling us we have maybe 40 harvests left as a global society. We have a level of inequality where now 1% of the world own 52% of the wealth at a level that seems to be incrementally going up and up time and time again. We have now got carbon at over 415 million parts per million at a level that everybody recognizes is simply not sustainable. And I think when we say that to each other, that this is not sustainable, we don't really have a sense of what that even means to be not sustainable. But I have a suspicion that we're going to find out in our lifetimes. I also think perhaps that we find that just too big a challenge, and we go, look, we can't do anything about that. That's just too big. But we can. And the challenge for us today, I think, in this community, a global one now, is to really reflect on what we can do. And my challenge to us would not be just to listen to some of the things you're going to hear and take away about the big pictures, but to ask ourselves as individuals, what are we going to do differently when we go away from here in 2 days' time? That we all need as individuals to start saying, personally, we have to take some more responsibility in what we're going to be doing. And I want to tease that out a little bit with the panel when we're talking about the scale of investing for impact, what that means, and what the challenges are for that. But before we're going to do that, we're going to have our first keynote speaker, who unfortunately can't be with us today, as someone who is actually not travelled with thousands of air miles and not therefore had a negative impact to start off, but she will be with us virtually. So we're going to welcome Lisa Hall to talk to us, and she'll be behind me any second now. Now, not yet. So Lisa is a senior fellow at Georgetown University. There she is. Hey. Hey. She spent the last 25 years working on economic and social justice. She was the managing director of Anthos Asset Management and the CEO of Calvert Foundations. So she doesn't know a thing or two about how we invest and have the level of impact that we need, then I don't suppose any of us do. She was working on policy advice for the National Economic Council for the Clinton administration. So she mixes this commercial experience with very much a public policy arena. Now, I'm not going to go through the rest of the long list of many roles that you have. I'm looking forward to hearing you speak to us. And for those of you who are on Twitter, you can immediately get to follow her at Lisa Green Hall, right? And we'll all be retweeting as we go. So, thank you very much. Lisa.
Thank you, Jeremy, for that kind introduction. I hope you can all hear me clearly. I'm pleased to be joining you remotely this morning. It is less of an impact on the carbon footprint for sure, but I am missing being in the room with you. It's a real pleasure and honor. I bring greetings from the Beck Center at Georgetown University, where I am now based as a fellow, leading our work on fair finance. And before I dive into the topic at hand, I just want to take a moment to describe our work at the Beck Center which is directly linked to the work of social value and the theme of the conference, Going Mainstream. We share your goal of wanting to change how leaders think and behave. At the Beck Center, we too want to change how society adopts core value. The Beck Center is a neutral academic player based at Georgetown University that works across sectors to generate new ideas that provoke leaders to think and behave differently. We are equipping future global leaders here at Georgetown and across the private and civic and public sectors to generate new ideas, to develop outcomes-driven solutions. And we also are incubating ideas for social change. We're using the tools of fair finance and data and digital to advance new tools, frameworks, and approaches to results-based outcomes. The Fair Finance portfolio aims to create more shared prosperity and to influence the rules and incentives that drive investment of private capital into overlooked and underestimated communities. As innovators and as pioneers in social value and measurement, you in this audience are responsible for much of what is now considered commonplace and required rigor for managing impact in investments. Thank you to our hosts, the Social Value Taiwan, for bringing together so many professionals from all over the world to discuss how we make social impact and social value a bigger part of all of our decision making. This preeminent conference on this topic it's an honor to be here speaking to you representing the Beck Center. And I want to take us back to 2005, the beginning of the century, when I joined Calvert Foundation to manage its portfolio and eventually to lead the organization. At that time, I could not have imagined the growth that has occurred in the industry over the past 15 years. Calvert Foundation, a pioneer in impact investing, has itself changed a great deal during this time frame. They even have a new name, Calvert Impact Capital. Then and now, Calvert works with investors to move capital into communities across the world by lending to organizations that are working in the areas of climate change, affordable housing, education, microfinance, and gender equity. Long before the term impact investing came into practice, many of us were deeply engaged in creating metrics, tools, and frameworks for measuring impact in microfinance and social enterprise in both emerging markets and in developed markets. And today, I want to focus on 5 important shifts in the industry that we have observed over time. The first shift is few players to many players. The second shift is a movement from outputs to outcomes. The third shift is a move from negative screening to positive screening. Number 4 is impact measurement to impact management. And number 5 is a shift from self-reporting to third-party verification. But before I jump into these paradigm shifts, let me first clarify a few basic terms. Because I sometimes think we use the word impact investing without really thinking through what we mean by it. Of course, the widely accepted definition now, which was originally promoted by the Global Impact Investing Network, is that impact investments are investments made with the intention to generate positive, measurable social and environmental impact alongside a financial return. But let's peel back the onion a bit. What do we mean when we say positive? To me and to many, this refers to a net positive impact. The example I often use to illustrate net positive impact comes from a real-life conversation that I had with an investment professional in the Netherlands some years ago around fracking. And I think most people in the audience are familiar with fracking, a type of drilling for oil and gas, which uses very high pressure injection of liquids into rock in order to extract deeply embedded fossil fuels. Well, in this conversation, my counterpart was trying to convince me that fracking is in fact impact investing. In developed countries, it is true that fracking has produced an enormous number of new jobs, and particularly in underserved communities. And that has created a positive impact in these places, for sure. However, fracking is also very detrimental to people and the planet. Net, there is not a positive impact, and it cannot be considered impact invested. The second way to know if something is impact investment is particularly relevant to this audience today, which is measurability. Can the impact be measured quantitatively? And I would emphasize the second part of that is, can it be measured qualitatively? That the measurement is not always a quantitative measurement. And we have to note, as is often quoted by impact investors and even sometimes by economists, that not everything that can be counted matters, and not everything that matters can be counted. That being said, I think there's general agreement that for an investment to be considered an impact investment, the impact must be measurable. And last but not least, there must be a financial return of capital and return on capital. We know this return can come in many forms. It can be interest income on a loan, dividends on a stock, a shared revenue agreement, to name just a few ways that capital can be returned. The key here is that some type of financial return must be generated, and therefore grants cannot be counted as impact investments. Net positive impact, measurability, and financial return are the three key characteristics of impact investments. And yet we know that our field uses many, many terms to mean the same thing as impact investing. And sometimes we even use the same terms to mean different things. But I want to reference under this broad category some of the terms that are used. Mission-driven investing, values-based investing, community investing, socially responsible investing, sustainable investing, and principled investing. And for purposes of this conversation today, I'd like us to think of all of those terms as synonymous with impact investing. When we started in the early years of this work, I took the perspective that a very big tent was good, that we should embrace all players that are interested in making impact investing to grow the field. I could not have imagined 15 years ago that the field would be as big as it has come and that the tent would grow so large. We now include players in the field of impact investing like major, very for-profit private equity firms like BlackRock, the Partners Group, and Bain Capital. Practically all of the global commercial and investment banks have some type of impact investing product for their clients, including JP Morgan Chase and Morgan Stanley. The amount of capital invested in impact has exploded to more than $500 billion in assets under management according to a survey of more than 1,300 investors surveyed by the GIN. There is no question that the number of players has grown and assets under management has grown significantly. And there are lots of implications of this growth, including a greater range of types of product offerings from all standpoints, from a risk perspective, from a financial return perspective, and a type of impact being generated. And this has led to a concern about impact washing. I started off talking about the definition of impact investing, and I believe that as the field grows and we have more and more products that self-describe as impact investments, that it becomes increasingly important to differentiate among these products for us to be able to tell the difference. And impact management is the tool that allows us to do that. You have seen lots of leadership out there in the area of impact management among high net worth individuals who've organized themselves through organizations like the Tonic and have conducted the T100 survey. And that all includes impact management now. We've seen the emergence of the Impact Management Project, which is a very broad collaboration and has done incredible work bringing together many different players under the tent to coordinate and collaborate around impact management practices. As most of you know, the IMP, Impact Management Project, has succeeded in developing consensus around 3 categories for investor intention and 5 dimensions around what should be considered impact. I will not go into detail about the ABCs or the 5 dimensions, but I want to mention them briefly. I know that they'll be covered in other sessions during the conference, and that this group is pretty familiar with the work that IMP has done. But one of the great strengths of the IMP work is its simplicity. So ABC, of course, refers to A, avoid harm, B, benefit stakeholders, and C, contribute to solutions. These are 3 very clear and simple ways to think about investor intention and investor objectives. The main purpose of these categories is to help investors align their values and align their intentions with other investors. And I would argue, more importantly, to align their intentions with their investees as they make their decisions about where to invest capital. With so many players under the same tent of impact investing, this alignment, I believe, is critical to the field and its future. In terms of the 5 dimensions, we've all seen the fantastic diagram outlining what, who, how much, contribution, and risk. And I'm, again, not going to go into details on these 5 dimensions of impact, but I think they're particularly relevant as we see many, many players come to the field. But that leads me to my second major shift that I think has occurred over time, a movement from simply considering outputs to focusing more on outcomes. So we're starting to see investors step away, for example, from just counting the number of students reached by a particular curriculum or intervention, and looking instead at whether they actually learn something in the classroom. Looking beyond in healthcare, counting the number of patients treated, and understanding if their health actually improved. This shift can be seen across many tools and frameworks, including the IFC principles for impact management launched just last year. Principle 6 of the IFC principles is to monitor the progress of each investment in achieving impact against expectations and to respond appropriately. In the description, it states that the managers shall seek to use the results framework to capture investment outcomes. The third major shift I want to highlight in impact management is negative screening versus positive screening. I'll be brief here, as I think it is obvious that we started as a movement around solely avoiding harm, and it's now evolved into a much broader-based approach to positive sustainable investment. And while there are so many investors that only focus on ESG practices and considerations, these investors are generally looking beyond what not to do and are looking affirmatively at best practices in the areas of environment, social, and governance. One interesting question to ask ourselves, and I would ask the audience to consider, is how can we use the learnings from the growth of ESG to apply to our efforts to capture and account for value in all areas of investing beyond just publicly listed companies. The rise of B corporations and this year's major announcement from the Business Roundtable committing to abandon shareholder primacy gives me hope that ultimately all companies will be held accountable for the impact that they are having on people and the planet. The fourth major shift in impact management that I think is worth highlighting is a move away from randomized control studies as the gold standard towards living data as a way to inform our decision-making and efforts to manage impact. Efforts or initiatives like 60 decibels are an example of this movement, where work is being done to collect data from the ground at the user level, which is becoming more and more feasible with the advances in technology. Although RCS is an important tool for us to use, it doesn't always capture all the factors that are critical to understanding investor satisfaction, which we saw in microfinance, where there's been very mixed investor satisfaction based on what the original goals were of a particular investment. I'd now like to move to the fifth and last major development in the field of impact management, which is the entire concept of impact management versus impact measurement. I would define impact management as the ongoing practice of measuring the risks of negative impacts and positive impacts in order to reduce the negative and increase the positive. In the early days of the work of social value and other pioneers like Social Performance Task Force and Axiom Center for Social Financial Inclusion, the work there created the foundation upon what much of the current work has evolved. And we owe a real debt to those of you in this room that for the work that you've done around impact management beyond just impact measurement. Impact management, of course, captures the full range of activities involved in monitoring and tracking and setting objectives. It's about performance, it's about how we use data, and how we inform ourselves through impact management to achieve better results. It also considers the resources required for investors and investees to implement impact measurement. It's a term that captures the entire value chain. I do want to mention one last element in terms of the evolving field of impact management, and that's around self-reported data to verification by third parties of data. This is a principle that's included in many frameworks and tools, and is the next stage, I believe, in the work of SASB, mirrored on the DAP accounting principles, which has spawned an entire industry around accounting audit firms. And as an example, earlier this year, Leapfrog announced a third-party independent audit of its impact. Audited data has long been an emphasis by the IMP and others like Social Value around best practices for impact management. But the field remains tiny and unsophisticated. And we see B-Lab leading efforts to build more experts capable of performing impact audits, but there's still a long way for the field to go. So I want to wrap up and say that 15 years ago, I had no idea that my professional path would take me around the world to Amsterdam, where I was based for 3 years with a family office. But I stand here today, sitting in the US, and can say with confidence that impact investing is no longer on the path to the mainstream. It is the mainstream. And the evidence includes the engagement of family offices like Anthos, where they launched a major impact investing initiative, and where my office was located together with all of the traditional portfolio managers. I was subject to the same procedures, regulations, and policies as other portfolio managers at Anthos. And I would argue if that's not mainstream, I don't know what is. My hope is that the topics and issues that we are covering here today around impact management and social value will be applicable to all portfolios and all investors in the years to come. In closing, I want to remind us all that the world is counting on us to be successful in our efforts. And to be successful, we must use all of the tools and resources at our disposal. As impact management continues to evolve, we must welcome everyone under the tent. And in large part because the problems we are facing are enormous. To solve these problems, we must leverage the talents and opportunities of all communities that comprehensively address such complex problems. Thank you for your attention this morning, and I look forward to seeing you next year in person at the Social Value International Conference 2020 to continue this dialogue with you. Thank you.